If you were worried about inflation, here's another event that could cause prices to go up. And what that is the East Coast port strike. First time ever possibly since 1977. We're talking about an association with 85,000 members, the International Longshoremen's Association. This is the North American's largest longshoremen's union, about to strike after midnight tonight. I'm shooting it on Monday tonight. Let me tell you why this is important to you. Here's what they're asking for. Of these 85,000 members, roughly 45,000 of the workers are involved. They're asking for a 77% raise for the next 6 years. This is 36 ports. Roughly 43% of all U.S. imports pass through these ports. This is the first time they may be going through a strike since 1977, and they're worried because automation could lead to job reductions by 15 to 30%, and you should know about this. You know why? Here's a number for you. Watch this. Port of New York and New Jersey handles $240 billion of annual goods. A strike just in one of these ports could cost $641 million in one of the ports. The one in Virginia could cost $600 million a day. We're going to talk about that today.
That intro you just saw was Patrick Bet-David, really well-known businessman who I believe became really famous after doing an interview of Kobe Bryant a few years back before he passed away. Patrick Bet-David is a business guy, and I would also say pretty right-leaning. And the reason I started with that clip was to show that a lot of the people who usually cover these labor stories in terms of independent media and even big media tend to be more business folks or right-leaning folks. So I'm going to cover this from a labor perspective. And if you're interested in me actually reviewing some of the videos that Patrick Bet-David has done on labor strikes, on unions, then just say so in the comments or visit us at unionbase.org and let us know. But I think, it's pretty interesting to get a labor take or someone that actually understands business and labor, which is what we do. Welcome back, everyone. We have an exclusive from CNBC. The ILA, that's the International Longshoremen's Association Union, and port owners held a secret meeting on automation as a new strike looms. And this was just published today on January 6th. By the time you're seeing this, this will be January 7th likely. But apparently there was a secret meeting between representatives of the International Longshoremen's Association and the US MX Port Ownership Group. And this was held on Sunday to make headway on the issue of port automation that needs to be resolved by January 15th to avoid a new East and Gulf Coast port strike. You may have heard about this like late in the fourth quarter last year, that there was a narrowly avoided strike. It would have been really disastrous for the U.S. economy, but it was in the context of also at the same time, the International Association of Machinists was also potentially in the middle of a strike at Boeing. So another key point, a document produced from the meeting and reviewed by CNBC indicates ports willing to pair any new technology with new union jobs. That's actually amazing. That's very, very interesting. But it could also introduce new risks to a deal, with added labor costs threatening terms agreed to in October for a 62% pay hike for union workers. I heard a lot of people complaining, hey, 62% is crazy. I mean, if 62% is what they're putting on the table, you sort of have to wonder how low they are now, both compared to the industry standard and also, how many years have they gone without significant increases? So that's the thing I always ask, just because I've been on the union side. The other side of it could be that they're making a completely unreasonable ask, but I think it's more likely that they're trying to catch up to something or make up for something, potentially inflation costs or other things. But anyway, formal talks are set to resume on Tuesday, and it remains unclear if the full port ownership group will support the new language on automation. So you have a picture of the port here, a truck picking up a container at the Norfolk International Terminals at the Port of Virginia is the largest terminal in the port, more than 90 semi-automated stacking cranes. One thing to know about the ports, if you don't know, is that, a massive amount of inventory comes in through the U.S. ports, whether it's Baltimore, whether it's New York, New Jersey, whether it's the Long Beach ports. These are super, super important ports for the U.S. And one of the big concerns that people were saying is that we already have a big problem with inflation. And if you thought price increases were bad during the pandemic, imagine what it would have been like if there was a massive national strike. So this is important. A secret meeting between key members of the International Longshoremen's Association and the United States Maritime Alliance was held on Sunday in an effort to help dock workers union and the port ownership find common ground on the heated issue of automation and semi-automation. A document produced out of the meeting indicates a focus on the creation of a new human job or jobs to complement any new port technology. So that's like pretty profound. I don't think I've heard of anything like that. But tying the creation of a new technology to a new human, I would love to hear what that contract language would look like and how they would implement that, because that is sort of just transition language. I don't think I've heard anyone apply that to AI, but people are concerned about the loss of jobs. So like, how do you answer that? Well, you say, hey, we're going to implement this, but we're also going to be creating jobs as well. CNBC has learned that the 8-hour meeting took place ahead of the highly anticipated resumption of formal bargaining and with a January 15th deadline to avoid a new strike by dock workers. According to sources close to the talks, who were granted anonymity due to the sensitive nature of negotiations, talks had recently broken down over the issue. Language on automation was drawn up to assist the full bargaining committee review process slated for Tuesday. If you don't know, if you are not a union leader or a union supporter, you don't know this. Usually, what unions do is they create what's called a bargaining committee. In some cases, like the union I created, we had people from the membership of the union representative of the concerns and proposals of the overall membership. And we would sit down at the table with the leadership of the company, the employer, and we would negotiate. We would put proposals back and forth across the table, and we would, try to get agreement and try to get a contract. In this case, I believe this is like, the staff of the union is negotiating, and at some point talks have broken down, which is what happens. That's typical in the union negotiations. But the sources added that the language could lead to new concerns about added labor costs and new risks to getting a comprehensive deal on wages and automation completed. That is a normal thing as well. Whenever you put something new on the table, you kind of may put something else at risk, but that's not a guaranteed thing. The meeting included individuals from port terminals where technology at issue is already used, including rail-mounted gantry, RMG, cranes at container terminals in Bayonne, New Jersey, part of the Port of New York in New Jersey, and the NIT terminal, part of the Port of Virginia. Among executives at the meeting were Paul Demiria, CEO of USMX, Kevin Price, President of Gateway Terminals, Joe Rudy, Chief Operations Officer of the Port of Virginia, and John Atkins, President of GCT USA, Anthony Ray, Executive Vice President of Operations at Mather Terminals, representing, so that's all the employer representatives, and I gotta say, that's pretty massive. It's important. I mean, these are high-level people, like really high-level executives, and having them in the room, that signals like this is we're serious about this, so you want to make a deal. So you want to see that. If they only had low-level people, then you're gonna be like, are they serious about making a deal? Representing the union were ILA President Harold Daggett and his son Dennis, who is Executive Vice President of the ILA, and Virgil Maldonado, President of the New York, New Jersey chapter of the ILA 1588. So that's a local. Most unions have an international union and then a local. This is local 1588 of the ILA. According to the document reviewed by CNBC, the agreement states that the ILA reserves the right to add union workers in the future to complement any new technologies. That's quite interesting. You usually don't hear about a union having any right to demand more work for their workers. That sounds pretty amazing. There might be some context there with the type of industry that they're in. I will reach out to some folks who have a lot of knowledge about that particular industry and see if that is normal. But there is a commitment by the parties to research and utilize all technology that would assist an operator in being more efficient and productive. This is a big thing that people always try to say about unions, that, unions aren't efficient, they're not productive. To have language that addresses that and also addresses the working conditions, that's what negotiations is supposed to be. The document specifies that skilled human crane operators have proven their ability to work with the aid of modern crane control systems to handle port tasks where precision is required. The crane technology includes cameras, alignment guides, anti-sway technology for precise container placement, and motion dampening controls. The document refers to semi-automated rail-mounted gantry crane operations where humans control complex tasks while automation handles repetitive motions. Interesting. So this is like humans in the loop, if you're familiar with that phrase in AI. So humans were necessary, robots were necessary. It also cites manual RMG operations in which union workers operate the cranes manually without automation. Loading positioning sensors, obstacle detection systems, and real-time feedback systems were also cited as tools that enable human operators to achieve precision comparable to automation. Even with the proposed language of automation suggesting that USMX is willing to give in to some union concerns over jobs, ports Sources say critical details still need to be worked out. That's, again, normal for negotiations. There's always details that need to be clarified, but it seems like they're trying to get closer to a deal. Sources within the USMX are concerned about new labor costs that do not actually reflect port needs and economics, which will ultimately ripple through the supply chain and reach the consumer. The rub is, what are deemed as necessary jobs? Said terminal operator. Is the job truly necessary, or is it a job being created for the sake of adding a worker? These extra jobs are paid by increasing the price of services paid by the shipper, the terminal operator said. These costs are then passed on to the consumer by the shipper. It's the definition of inflation. Well, actually, that's not the definition of inflation. There's an economic definition of inflation, but I think that's a fair concern. Like, you want to have the type of workers employed. I believe the union and the employer would want people to be hired who are necessary. And because if they're not necessary, then they can be let go, right? Reduction in force is what they call it. If you're risking that if you just hire people for no reason. The ILA declined to comment on the meeting. So that this comment here is really something you hear employers say. It's the employer perspective. I'm not calling it right or wrong. In this case, I'm just saying it's typically an employer perspective. But again, this is all off the record. So this might have been somebody from within the union commenting, somebody within the employer commenting, but they don't want to be on record. So this is all sort of hearsay from CNBC reporting. It remains unclear if the full USMX bargaining team will agree to document language on automation risks or risk another strike. Quote, "We are at an inflection point," said a member of the USMX. "If either side cannot come to an agreement and there is a strike, it is a roll of the dice for either side to see if a better agreement could be carved out if there was a government intervention." Well, a lot of these industries have been relying on intervention. For example, the railway strike, when President Biden intervened there, which a lot of labor people are pretty pissed off about that, right? But where does President Donald Trump going to stand on that, especially since, he has a sort of slightly more friendly labor, head of labor, which was unexpected. And then this relationship with the Teamster president, where does he stand on this? He likes to at least, say that he's more labor friendly. President Donald Trump recently voiced strong support for the union position on automation. Donald Trump is usually more friendly with conservative leaning unions, right? He's not necessarily friendly with the lefty leaning ones that have relationships with, Kamala Harris and Biden and people like that, which is most of the labor movement. But there are some pretty well-known unions that have conservative leanings. The USMX member said that if the proposed terms of automation requiring any new port technology be matched by new jobs are accepted by the full USMX, then the tentative 62% wage increase that the USMX agreed to in October to end this first strike should be off the table. Keeping automation on as status quo arguably eliminates the ability to pay for the increase, the USMX member said. So this is a part of the internal discussion and will be part of the carrier's consideration on whether to accept the deal discussed yesterday. The working document states that if a mutual agreement cannot be reached on the use of that, what is defined as operator-assisted technology, the subject will be referred to what is known as a technology committee process used by the union in ports, which consists of co-chairmen and 5 additional members from each side, as well as Harold Daggett, along with his 2 sons, John and Dennis. That is the final step before arbitration if necessary. Arbitration is when you're basically forced, I don't want to say forced, but like you're sitting down, both sides at the table, and there's a neutral body. It could be a government, a judge, or somebody appointed to sort of make sure that there's a way for you to come to an agreement, right? They sort of figure it out for you as opposed to you figuring it out. While the personnel additions tied to new technology would be subject to local union chapter bargaining, the final approval will come from the ILA's national office. So that means that basically the president and the executive leadership will decide if they agree to the final agreement. Quote, "All of these decisions are controlled by Daggett's in the end." Yeah, so that's basically what I'm saying, said the terminal operator. "This contract continues to increase Daggett's leverage in the union by deciding how many people get hired and which one of those lucky enough to be hired gets the biggest paycheck." I mean, that's actually who gets hired ultimately is up to the employer. Unions have some leverage in that conversation. But I'm not going to comment on this particular union's leverage in that. But yeah, so this is where we are. We'll keep up with this story. We'll let you know if there have been any developments in the coming weeks. But this is something that is currently breaking. ILA union and port owners had a secret meeting on automation as a new strike looms. Thanks for listening. And as usual, visit unionbase.org or .com. Remember to upgrade your account if you're interested in getting a sort of more in-depth inside information. My personal take and my team's take on what's happening, because, we can't really share some things completely publicly, and it's nice for a small audience where we can sort of share what we really think about some things. But for the rest of the general public, we'll continue to share updates here. All right, thanks.